I've covered the ATS 20 in several videos before, and I think it's pretty clear what my experiences of it as a shortwave receiver have been. But I thought I'd show you an article that I came across in the December 2021 issue of Radio User magazine. This magazine's a UK-based publication. It's aimed at the listener. It has a sister magazine called Practical Wireless, which is more for the transmitting amateur, but Radio User covers the shortwave spectrum, VHF, UHF and so on, everything from the listener's point of view. And quite often they have receiver reviews, as you'd expect. Some of the reviews are very in-depth and very good, particularly when they're done by people who are clearly passionate shortwave listeners. This review is probably more of an overview, and it's been written by the editor of Radio User magazine, who's clearly picked up one of these ATS 20s, and you can see that the article there is entitled "Small is Beautiful." That's interesting in itself, because I know some of the feedback I've had on my videos have actually criticised the appearance of the ATS 20, particularly the exposed screws on the case. Although the case is quite robust, but I certainly wouldn't call the receiver beautiful. It is small, however. But what did the reviewer think of it? Well, sadly, this was a very cursory review, if I can call it a review. It's, as I say, it's more of an overview. The points that the editor of Radio User brought up was that there are a lot of cheap fakes, apparently, of these radios around, which the article states. I think that's rather odd in itself, because who is the manufacturer of this receiver? I think these are built by various people, probably in various parts of China, basically all to the same design and pretty much all from the same kit of parts. There are some slight differences, but fakes, well, how can you fake something that hasn't got a manufacturer's name on it? I don't know. The reviewer here has used the radio mainly on its own telescopic whip, which is probably the best way to use these, because then you don't get the overload problems you can with a full-size external antenna. And he found that it worked fairly well in terms of powerful broadcast stations on shortwave. He was able to receive medium wave stations quite well with a telescopic, and also local FM broadcasts. So he was quite happy with it on the telescopic. He found that the sensitivity was good, but he says good sensitivity, but in no way is it a DX machine. So not really sure what he meant there. I know my view of this is connected up to an external antenna, and it will work, but you will get overload problems. You're probably going to need to use the attenuator that's built into the radio. The operating system's fairly quirky, and there's no mention in this article made anywhere of the many reported reliability problems with these radios. Lots of people have ordered these and they've come not fully working, maybe not switching into SSB properly, which is a fault I had with one of mine. The tuning encoder is famed for not lasting very long and needing replacement if you're able to replace it, and it's quite a fiddly job. And there are various other sort of quality issues with these, and I've had feedback from several of my viewers. They've had to open disputes and send the radios back and get refunds and things like that. None of this is mentioned here. It's a very quick overview of the radio, and really I think the reviewer here has probably done the Chinese manufacturers a lot of favours, but maybe not the ordinary shortwave listener. So unless you want something to experiment with and something you're likely to have to open up, certainly something you're going to have to do some Arduino based updates on. At the moment I would avoid these. I've seen these little radios now down to about £35 delivered, which I suppose looks tempting, but you're still going to have issues. So if you've seen December 21 Radio User magazine, just beware, that's not really a full review. Let's move on now to the ATS 25, and the review for the ATS 25 was in the latest and potentially the last ever edition of the World Radio TV Handbook. And it's clear that this radio has been looked at by somebody that knows their stuff, knows their shortwave receivers, and has spent some time with the radio. Now, WRTH points out that the ATS-25 has good battery life, which again, I'd agree with that. It's got reasonable build quality, certainly better than the 20. We haven't had any reports of encoders failing and things like that. It does seem a better build quality than the ATS-20, quite acceptable. WRTH also points out the fact that these radios, and the ATS-20 is no different, don't have any bandpass filters, and they don't have any switched attenuator. Although they do have an attenuator function within the software, but we'll come to that in a moment. But as such, they're going to be prone to overload. If they're on any sort of a decent antenna, you're going to have overload and image problems. This is pointed out in the review here, and I think it's probably the biggest failing of this radio is the lack of bandpass filters and the overload issue. Probably the biggest failing is pointed out here. The reviewer does seem a bit confused about the AGC settings that are in the menu of this radio, but as I've mentioned before, the AGC isn't an AGC setting as far as I can see with these radios. It's an attenuator. It's an attenuator, and you're going to need to switch it in, and you're going to need some degree of attenuation when you're using these in order to get them to work properly. The review in WRTH points out that the battery voltage readout doesn't work properly on their review sample, and it doesn't on this one. It reads 0 or something random, but it doesn't reflect the battery charge. The screen noise issue is raised particularly on the telescopic whip. WRTH found that there was significant screen noise, particularly on shortwave when using the radio on the telescopic, which agrees with my findings. And they also mention the whooshing noise, or the soft mute as they call it, which is particularly annoying when you're tuning single sideband. So it's clear that whoever's looked at this radio for this review has spent a bit of time with it, and they're really familiar with its use. And to sum up, WRTH actually says that for the shortwave listener, a more conventional radio would be a better option. And you know, I've said a couple of times now that if you're looking for a cheap functional shortwave receiver, although this looks nice with its screen, and we'll just fire it up here and see if we can get away from the reflections. Although that looks quite attractive, and the touch screen, okay, is certainly a novelty, something like the XH Data D808 is far superior, far easier to use, just a better all-round receiver, particularly as these are still around the £100 UK mark, which I think for what they are is way overpriced. When we're talking about this at maybe £35 UK delivered, it's probably worth taking a chance. You might get, possibly the later ones have got a slightly better encoder. This one, still working fine, and I've had it a while now. Don't pay a lot for these. And if you want to do some serious shortwave DXing or shortwave listening, a Texan or a Sanjian or the XH Data, far better bet. But two very different radios in some ways, although the RF circuitry is identical in both. Operating system's quite difficult, it's quite difficult in some ways, but quite different. Two very different reviews. So we've yet to have really a proper in-depth review of the ATS-20, but WRTH's view of the ATS-25, reading between the lines, again, it's an avoid for that one. It looks pretty, but as a shortwave receiver, it's not really that good. Thanks for watching.